I want to start with you, David Remnick. Set the stage for us. Putin has been watching Trump criticize NATO all week. He saw these indictments go down on Friday. What do you think is going through Putin's mind, and how is he likely to be interpreting President Trump's behavior?
He's delighted. He's absolutely delighted. You have to. It's very important to think, what does Vladimir Putin want here? Vladimir Putin is the authoritarian leader of a country that's struggling, that used to be in a Cold War struggle with the United States, where there was a kind of global conflict between the United States and the old Soviet Union. That no longer exists. What does he want? He wants to reassert Russian strength on the global stage. He wants to throw the United States off balance, and he wants to divide the United States with its allies. Mission almost accomplished. If you look at the last week, you saw the United States president berating and humiliating the Chancellor of Germany, doing the same to the Prime Minister of England, and completely ignoring indictments against 12 operators of GRU, the Russian military intelligence. He is succeeding on the world stage with a very weak hand.
Susan Glasser, let me bring you in. You spoke to 16 former U.S. government officials who have worked with every American president, going back to Ronald Reagan, about preparations for this summit. They all said there's no historical precedent for the meeting that's going to take place. You write in your piece for The New Yorker, quote, Republicans and Democrats alike were resigned to Trump being outplayed by Putin. A former State Department official who spent decades preparing meetings between U.S. and Russian leaders said, quote, I'm afraid our guy here is like an amateur boxer going up against Muhammad Ali. What could Vladimir Putin do in this meeting? I mean, he doesn't have Jedi mind tricks. What actually can he achieve?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you, I thought that was an interesting observation, but a lot of people have said, well, that implies that President Trump views this as a boxing match, which perhaps he does not. Many people think that President Trump, who personally sought this meeting, that his goal, in fact, is to have a much more friendly encounter with President Putin. He said that just the other day while he was busy bashing our allies. As David pointed out, he was also saying he'd like to make friends someday with Vladimir Putin. But I think the thing about President Putin to understand is that he's a former KGB officer. He is the exact opposite in many ways of Donald Trump when it comes to a meeting like this. He's not about winging it. He's not about just following his gut. I was at the first interview that President Putin had with American correspondents back in 2001 after George W. Bush looked into his soul. Remember that one?
Yeah.
And, you know, the thing that really struck with me then was this is a guy who had literally read and almost memorized his briefing books, and he really wanted us to know it. He's careful. He's methodical. He knows what he wants, but arguably he's already gotten what he wants, which is the meeting itself, being welcomed back onto the world stage after illegally annexing the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine in 2014.
Nicholas Burns, you've actually been in meetings with Vladimir Putin. Tell us about your firsthand impression.
Well, Putin's the most experienced leader in the world today. He's been in power for 18 years. He's very smart. He's very well organized. It's obvious that he prepares for these meetings. He tends to be able to go down layers deep on these issues. He's not at all superficial. And he can be very aggressive. One way to look at the big issue for tomorrow, Jake, is that Putin fired the opening salvo in a new cyber war against the United States 2 years ago. And there has not been a response by President Trump. There's been no acknowledgement of it, no pushback by the president, no warning to Putin. And I think that's the big question for tomorrow. Can the president finally respond? Putin's going to be prepared.
David Remnick, let me ask you, how do you explain this fact? How do you explain the fact that President Trump has never criticized Vladimir Putin in any real meaningful way, the same way that he's, for instance, gone after the cast of Hamilton or attacked me or Chuck Todd? How do you explain the fact that he has yet to acknowledge Russian election interference firsthand or even say anything about the indictments and in terms of condemning Russia?
Well, he must see you, Jake, as a much greater threat to global stability than Vladimir Putin. It's inexplicable. And I don't think, I'm not ready to leap to the conclusion that somehow that this is a meeting between a controller, a KGB controller, and his agent. That I think is leaping way beyond the evidence. But I do think that it is a combination of you have a president of the United States that's interested in one thing above all, and that's domestic politics. Domestic politics. And he is playing right into the hands of Vladimir Putin. He is dividing his own country. He is dismissing threats to his own country when it comes to Russia. He is completely misreading what's going on in the globe, all to create greater and greater support among his base. He is creating a hero out of Vladimir Putin among a kind of cultural conservatives. This is inexplicable to me. It is, you know, what Donald Trump does on a day-to-day basis, we struggle to explain on programs like this or in the New York or the New York Times or wherever. But there are some days where you have to throw up your hands and say, what the hell is going on? And that's what leads to, I think, part of the deep suspicion against him. It is sometimes beyond explanation. But the effects
Susan
of
Glasser,
the effects on our foreign policy are deeply, deeply destructive.
Susan Glasser, I want to show some images from a meeting that President Putin had with Angela Merkel in terms of showing how he uses power plays to exert dominance. President Trump, of course, is well known for his handshake where he does this kind of thing. But look at these images. Angela Merkel has a well-known fear of dogs. And this is in 2007, Russian President Vladimir Putin bringing his dog, which looks like a stand-in for Cujo, to a meeting with Merkel. Look at her. She looks absolutely terrified. Do we expect that he could try to do something like that? Obviously, he's not going to bring his dog here to Helsinki, but that he could try to do something like that with President Trump?
Well, you know, look, I think that both Putin and Trump have gone out of their way to suggest that what they want is not pictures of each other cowering in fear, but quite the opposite, that this is a summit that was arranged by both of them with the goal of making nice. Remember that it was Donald Trump who actually invited President Putin to have this meeting back at the famous do not congratulate phone call in March when he actually did congratulate President Putin for his re-election victory. And actually...
Re-election victory,
right.
in quotes.
And
yeah.
so what's really interesting is that Vladimir Putin then spent months personally encouraging Trump to actually go ahead and schedule the meeting. They have taken the position that it's Donald Trump versus his own advisors versus the American establishment. I guess that would be people like you and me, as well as many senators in Donald Trump's own party who are very suspicious of President Putin. They have been the party of Cold War hawks up until now. And so it's almost this political reversal that you have going on. And so Putin, he doesn't want to scare Donald Trump with a dog, but I think he's going to be very well prepared to get inside Donald Trump's well-known love of flattery, pomp and circumstance. Trump is willing to praise those who praise him. And there's no question in my mind that Vladimir Putin is well aware of that headed into this meeting.